Hello, my friends, and welcome to our second reading lesson of the week. As you remember, yesterday we began our week by thinking a little bit about nonfiction. Again, we know that nonfiction stories are stories that are full of information or true facts. They're not just created in the author's brain. And we thought yesterday about how sometimes nonfiction authors are really smart and they use great questions, sometimes provide the answers, sometimes they don't, to engage the reader, to get the reader really interested, to get the reader to connect the information they already have in their brain about the topic with the new information, and just make it more of a fun reading experience. Now, today we're going to think a little bit more about how nonfiction authors choose to structure their stories, okay? So we know, because we learned before, there's 3 different types of nonfiction text, right? So this is to say that each type has a different structure, different organization. And today we're going to be thinking more about the narrative nonfiction type. And we also, beyond just narrative nonfiction, we'll find that a lot of nonfiction stories have a certain structure, right? Like they almost read like a story, but they tell the events kind of in order as they happen, okay? And this is really important, right? Because when we're telling true information, we're sharing true facts about true events, oftentimes it would be really confusing if the author chose to put what happened at the end in the beginning and mixed up all the details. It would make it really hard as a reader to understand what that author was doing. So oftentimes these authors put their information kind of in order like a story, so it reads like a story, okay? And we read a perfect example of this morning. It's called We March by Shane Evans. And we learned that this is all about the March on Washington that happened in 1963 and how important an event it was and how it showed people coming together and advocating for what they believe in. We're going to connect what we learned during that time to our reading lesson today, because we know that Shane Evans, this author, chose to write this nonfiction, right? Because we know it's a true event, tells all true facts, to tell it like a story, right? To make it almost like a storybook. And there's certain clues in the story, certain words that he uses to tell that this is kind of has a progression, right? So even on the very first page, and we can see it here, the author writes, "The morning is quiet," right? They're telling us from the very beginning, our day begin, right? Like we begin in the morning when the sun is rising and it's quiet. So we can tell that this is the morning time when it begins. But then as the story goes on, the sun rises. They begin to prepare, right? It marks that it says, "We come from all over." So this is showing that not only are they preparing, they're praying, they're getting their signs, people are coming together. This author, Shane Evans, is showing us that things are kind of happening in steps, leading up to the big march and leading up to the great speeches, and kind of that great feeling that was had at, this huge important event in our history, right? We read this story, so we know from beginning to end, it tells that progress. Now, I have a question for you. If this author, Shane Evans, chose to begin with what it was like at the march to stand together, would we be confused? Probably, right? We would probably be confused, and we probably also wouldn't appreciate all the steps that took these folks to get there, okay? So when we're thinking about nonfiction text, we want to think about the fact that sometimes nonfiction authors choose to write it like a story. They choose to write it like a story so that their reader can understand all the events that happen and can really appreciate and understand the importance of those events that led throughout the whole story. So my friends, you're going to be continuing to think about this today. We are going to circle back on Thursday to think a little bit more about nonfiction. But until then, my friends, happy reading. Bye.